Long before history was written in ink, it was carved in thunder, shadow, and stars. In an age when the world was still young, and mortals trembled beneath the skies, the universe was ruled not by science or law, but by gods, monsters, and heroes. Titans waged wars across eternity. Gods were born from chaos and vengeance, and mortals dared to defy destiny with nothing but courage and fire. This is the story of Greek mythology, not as dusty legend, but as a living saga, bursting with love, betrayal, war, ambition, punishment, and immortality. You may think you know the tales, the mighty Zeus hurling lightning from Olympus, Achilles dragging a prince through the dust of Troy, Odysseus braving storms and sirens to find his way home. But this is more than a collection of myths. This is the grand design of a world where gods fall in love with mortals, monsters lurk beneath the waves, and fate weaves a tapestry no one, not even the gods, can escape. So settle in, because over the next hour, we're going to journey through the entire history of Greek mythology, from the birth of the cosmos to the death of belief, from the primordial darkness to the dawn of Western civilization. This isn't just a story. It's the origin of storytelling itself. Let the legends begin. In the beginning, there was nothing. No sky arched above, no earth lay beneath, no sea stirred with waves. There was only chaos, a deep, yawning void, a vast and shadowy space without time, direction, or purpose. Chaos was not malevolent nor benign. It was simply the absence of everything. Yet within that nothingness stirred the possibility of everything. From chaos came the first primordial beings, beings of immense power and mystery. The first to emerge was Gaia, the earth itself. Ancient and living, rich with mountains, plains, and deep veins of metal and stone. Then came Tartarus, a pit of darkness that lay even deeper than chaos, destined to become a prison for the most dangerous and defeated beings in the cosmos. Erebus came next, embodying the dark shadows of the underworld, followed by Nyx, the goddess of night, cloaked in black silence and secrets. From their union came Ether, the bright upper air that the gods would later breathe, and Hemera, the Deu, who chased her mother Nyx across the sky in an eternal cycle of light and darkness. Gaia, fertile and mighty, longed for a partner. From within herself she brought forth Uranus, the sky, brilliant and expansive, star-studded and ever-reaching. I arched over her lovingly, covering the earth, and from their divine embrace were born the first children of true power. These children would become known as the Titans, 6 sons and 6 daughters: Oceanus, Hyperion, Cus, Crius, Iapetus, and Cronus, Dea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys. These were the first generation of gods, beings of power and shape, who would shape the cosmos in their image. But not all their offspring were fair to look upon or well received. Gaia and Uranus also bore the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants whose single blazing eye saw through lies and darkness. They were smiths and builders, gifted but crude in their appearance. Frightened Uranus. Even more fearsome were the Hecaton-Chirs creatures, with 50 heads and 100 arms each. They were massive and wild, impossible to control, and Uranus, horrified by their form, cast them into the depths of Gaia herself, forcing her to carry their weight and suffer their confinement. Gaia groaned in pain and anger, her body stretched and tortured by the imprisoned children. Though she loved Uranus once, his cruelty had made him a tyrant. She began to plot. In secret, she forged a great sickle made of the hardest stone and called upon her Titan sons to rise up against their father. Yet none dared answer the call, none. But Cronus, the youngest, shrewdest, and most ambitious of them all. Cronus agreed to carry out his mother's plan. One night when Uranus descended upon Gaia once more, Cronus lay in wait. With the sickle in hand, he lunged from hiding and struck his father with a ferocity born of hatred and desperation. With one terrible slash, Cronus castrated Uranus, severing his power forever. The blood of Uranus fell upon the earth, and from it sprang new beings, The Furies, spirits of vengeance, who would hunt the guilty until death. The Giants, fierce warriors of enormous strength. The Malaya nymphs of the ash tree. The severed genitals of Uranus fell into the sea, and from the foam that gathered around them, a form began to take shape. Beautiful beyond compare, glowing. With charm and allure, Aphrodite rose from the waters. She would become the goddess of love, lust, and irresistible desire. And her power would prove to be as great as any thunderbolt or trident. Uranus, though maimed and cast down, did not depart. Without a curse, with his final breath of divine rage, he prophesied that just as Cronus had overthrown him, so too would one of Cronus's own children one day rise up to overthrow their father. But Cronus ignored the warning, eager to rule. He declared himself king of the cosmos and took his sister Rhea as his queen. Together they ruled over the heavens and earth, bringing forth a new age. In time, Rhea bore him children first, Hestia, then Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. But Cronus, haunted by his father's prophecy, took no chances. As each child was born, he opened his mouth wide and swallowed them whole, one by one, trapping them in the dark prison of his belly. Rhea, devastated, wept in silence. She had carried these children, felt them stir inside her, and now they were lost in the darkness, swallowed by their own father's fear. When she became pregnant with her sixth child, Rhea could bear no more. She sought the counsel of Gaia, who had once helped her own son rebel against a cruel father. Together, they devised a plan. When the time came to give birth, Rhea traveled in secret to the island of Crete. There, in a hidden cave on Mount Ida, she gave birth to a son, Zeus. She wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and gave it to Cronus, who, thinking it was his newborn, swallowed it without question. Meanwhile, the infant Zeus was hidden and raised in secret. Some say he was cared for by nymphs, who nourished him with honey and goat's milk. Others say the divine goat Amalthea suckled him, and the Curetes, armed dancers, clashed their swords and shields to mask his cries from Cronus's ears. Zeus grew strong and cunning. As he reached adulthood, the time came to challenge his father. He journeyed to Olympus and disguised himself as a cupbearer, the help of the wise goddess Metis. He prepared a powerful potion that would force Cronus to expel the children he had swallowed. Cronus drank the concoction, and one by one, Zeus's siblings emerged. Fully grown, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, reunited and free. The six siblings declared war on Cronus and the Titans. Thus began the Titanomachi, a war that would last for 10 years and reshape the cosmos forever. The Titans, led by Cronus and his loyal followers, took their stronghold upon Mount Othrys, while the Olympians, young and fiery, gathered upon Mount Olympus. At first, the war was balanced, with the power of the Titans matched by the fury of the younger gods. But the Olympians needed an edge. On the advice of Gaia, Zeus journeyed deep into the bowels of the earth to free the Cyclopes and Hecatontures, who had long been imprisoned by Cronus. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged mighty gifts, thunder and lightning for Zeus, trident for Poseidon, a helm of invisibility for Hades. The Hecatontures hurled rocks and mountains with their 100 arms. Turning the tide of battle, Zeus unleashed his thunderbolts, lighting the sky and shattering the earth. Poseidon stirred the oceans into great tsunamis. Hades slipped unseen into the Titan stronghold, spreading terror and confusion. Was cast down, as the Titans who had followed him were chained and hurled into Tartarus, bound for eternity beneath the earth, guarded by the 100-handed ones they had once imprisoned. One Titan, Atlas, was punished with a fate even heavier. He was condemned to stand at the edge of the world and bear the weight of the sky upon his shoulders until the end of time. With victory secured, the three brothers Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to divide the world. Zeus became the king of the sky, the lord of storms and justice. Poseidon took dominion over the seas, and all creatures within them bowed to his will. Hades became the ruler of the underworld, where the souls of the dead would reside. Earth remained common ground for all, though Zeus reigned as supreme ruler of gods and men. Yet even after victory, danger remained. From the depths of Gaia's fury came a final terror. Typhon, a monstrous creature born to destroy the gods. Taller than mountains with 100 dragon heads and eyes of fire, Typhon stormed the heavens, roaring with the voices of beasts. The gods fled in fear, disguising themselves as animals and hiding in distant lands. Only Zeus stood to face him. The battle that followed shook the very bones of the world. Thunder clashed against flame, and the winds howled like armies in agony. Typhon tore mountains from the earth and hurled them at the sky. Zeus struck back with bolt after bolt, until at last he struck Typhon down and hurled him into Tartarus. Some say his body lies beneath Mount Etna. The eruptions are the result of his rage burning underground. With the last of the great monsters defeated, peace returned. The rule of the Olympians was secured, and a new era began. The gods took their thrones on Mount Olympus, watching over the world below. Their adventures had only just begun, and soon they would create mankind. Play favorites among mortals, fall into jealous feuds, and spawn heroes whose names would echo through time. But before all of that, before the Trojan War, before Heracles, or Perseus, before love stories and tragedies, there was this beginning. Born from chaos, shaped by blood and betrayal, the world had been forged by the clash of generations. The story of Greek mythology had only just begun. After the defeat of the Titans and the burial of Typhon beneath the trembling earth, the gods settled into their new reign with a sense of triumph and purpose. Zeus, king of the heavens, ruled from Mount Olympus, which rose into the clouds like a palace of stormlight. The sky was his canvas, and with each roll of thunder and strike of lightning, he announced his authority to gods and mortals alike. Beside him stood Hera, his sister and queen, proud and watchful. The other Olympians took their place. His Poseidon returned to the depths, ruling over the roaring oceans and stormy seas with his trident. Hades descended into the underworld, cloaked in shadow, to oversee the silent world of the dead. The daughters and sons of the Titans joined them: Athena, born of wisdom from Zeus's own skull; Artemis and Apollo, twin archers of moon and sun; Hephaestus, god of the forge; Dionysus, god of ecstasy; Ares, the wrath of war; Hermes, swift-footed messenger; in Demeter, goddess of the harvest and fertility of the land, Olympus became a place of divine revelry, judgment, and eternal schemes. From high above, the gods looked upon the earth, which until then lay wild and empty of purpose. The stars wheeled overhead, the seas rolled, the forests rustled in the wind, but there were no creatures yet who could worship, build, love, or defy. Zeus, seeking to bring balance to creation and fulfill the destiny of the cosmos, commanded that a new race be brought forth, a race of living beings who could reason, speak, remember, and reflect the divine image in mortal form. Thus began the creation of mankind. Two brothers, Titans who had not fought against the Olympians during the war, were entrusted with this task. They were Prometheus and Epimetheus, sons of Iapetus. Prometheus, whose name meant forethought, was wise and cunning, a lover of progress and humanity. His brother, Epimetheus, meaning afterthought, was kind but dim-witted, often acting before thinking. The two set to work shaping the world's creatures. Epimetheus gave to the animals their gifts: wings to birds, fur to bears, scales to serpents, speed to deer, claws to lions, camouflage to insects. He poured all the talents into the beasts of the world, leaving nothing for mankind. When it came time to shape men, Prometheus found there was nothing left to give. Mankind was left weak, hairless, slow, and vulnerable to the cold, to predators, and to starvation. Yet Prometheus loved mankind more than any other race. He fashioned them carefully from clay, shaping them to stand upright like the gods. Compensate for their weakness, he devised a final gift fire. Fire which warmed the body, cooked food, warded off beasts, and forged weapons and tools. It was not a gift meant for mortals, for Zeus had forbidden it, fearing that fire would make mankind too powerful, too godlike. But Prometheus defied Zeus, under the cover of night, He ascended Olympus and stole fire from the gods, hiding it inside a hollow fennel stalk. He descended again and gave it to humankind, who learned quickly to build hearths, forges, and cities. They sang and honored Prometheus in temples, offering him their praise as the bringer of civilization. This act enraged Zeus. He saw it as treachery, not only the theft of divine power, but a challenge to his authority. Mankind, now growing in strength and intelligence, no longer lived in fearful dependence on Olympus. Their fires glowed in the darkness, and their temples praised the Titan who had defied the king of the gods. Zeus decided punishment was necessary, not just for Prometheus, but for humanity as well. First, he turned his wrath upon Prometheus, summoned the divine smith Hephaestus, and ordered him to forge chains unbreakable by god or man. Prometheus was seized by force, taken to the remote peaks of the Caucasus Mountains, and bound to a rock face. There he was to remain for eternity. Each day, an eagle symbol of Zeus would descend upon him and tear out his liver. Each night, the organ would regenerate, only to be devoured again the next day. Prometheus suffered in agony, but he never cried out. He endured the punishment with dignity, for he had given hope and fire to mankind. But Zeus's vengeance was not yet complete. He sought to corrupt mankind from within, to plant within their hearts a seed of doom. To do this, he devised the first woman. Until then, only men had walked the earth. Zeus summoned Hephaestus to mold a woman from clay. God bestowed a gift upon her: beauty from Aphrodite, curiosity from Hermes, charm from Apollo, skill from Athena. They named her Pandora, which means all-gifted. She was given a sealed jar or box, in later tellings and warned never to open it. Then she was sent to Earth as a bride for Epimetheus, who, despite Prometheus's warnings never to accept gifts, from Zeus took her gladly. Pandora lived among men, radiant and mysterious. But her curiosity, placed in her by Hermes, gnawed at her day and night. At last, unable to resist, she unsealed the jar. From within burst all the sorrows of the world disease: hatred, envy, greed, despair, violence, and death. The spirits flew out like shadows, sweeping over the land, infecting mankind. She screamed and tried to shut the jar, but it was too late. All the evils had escaped, all but one. At the bottom of the jar, trembling in the darkness, was hope, the last and most fragile gift. Some say Pandora released it, giving mankind a light to endure the suffering. Others say she trapped it, and that hope is but an illusion, a whisper beneath the weight of despair. With Pandora's mistake, humanity changed. They no longer lived in peace and innocence. They fought wars, endured plague, and betrayed one another. But they also learned to love more fiercely, to build higher, to reach farther, for they carried within them that last spark hope, the silent defiance of fate. Meanwhile, Zeus, from his throne on Olympus, watched it all unfold. He would not destroy humanity, for they were useful in their worship, and their suffering pleased his sense of cosmic order. He left them to their devices, and the gods began to play their parts more directly. The Olympians began to interfere in mortal affairs. Poseidon sent floods when offended. Hera, jealous and proud, punished mortal women who bore the children of Zeus. Ares thrilled at the outbreak of war, whispering rage into the ears of kings. Athena, wise and patient, gifted laws and architecture to the noble. Dionysus taught wine and madness. Demeter brought the growth of grain, and when her daughter Persephone was taken by Hades, she let the world grow cold in mourning. The lives of mortals became a theater for divine amusement and fury. Zeus, despite his role as the king of justice, was often the source of imbalance. He fell in love often with mortal women, nymphs, and goddesses alike. His conquests brought forth heroes and demigods, beings with mortal bodies and divine blood. Among them would rise Heracles, Perseus, and many others who would one day shake the world with their deeds. But for now, the gods were still learning to manage their power and their whims. They squabbled amongst themselves, plotted revenge, and played with fate as if it were a thread to pull and twist. Humanity continued to grow. Divided into the 5 ages, In the Golden Age, under Cronus's rule before the Olympians, mortals lived in peace and abundance. In the Silver Age, they were foolish and impious, and Zeus destroyed them. The Bronze Age brought warriors and violence. The Heroic Age birthed legends and champions. And the Iron Age, the age of toil and pain, was the present age, in which men suffered more and believed less. Sty, but still looked to the sky with wonder and fear. Prometheus, bound to the rock, endured his torture for generations. But the prophecy of his eventual release whispered through the mountains. One day, a mortal would rise with strength enough to kill the eagle and break his chains, a child of Zeus, born of mortal woman, strong beyond measure. That day was not yet come. For now, Olympus ruled, and mankind struggled under the weight of divine will. Carrying both the gift of fire and the curse of sorrow, the stage was set for the great tales of love and betrayal, of wars fought for beauty and pride, of mortals daring to challenge the gods and gods learning the meaning of mercy. The myths of Greece would unfold not only as stories of power, but as mirrors of the human soul. From clay and chaos had come men and women who could weep, sing, create, and destroy. And high above, in thrones of cloud and marble, the gods watched and waited. After the gods had secured their dominion over heaven and earth, and the Titans were sealed in the abyss of Tartarus, a new era began. It was not an age of gods nor beasts, but of men touched by divinity, demigods, born of mortal yearning and immortal power. The age of heroes had dawned, and with it, the songs of legends would echo through the ages. The Olympians, though divine, were not distant rulers. They were often entangled in the lives of mortals, seducing, testing, guiding, and punishing them. Zeus, ever consumed by desire, wandered the earth in various forms: a swan, a bull, a shower of golden rain seducing mortal women and fathering children who bore both mortal courage and divine strength. From this union of God and man, heroes were born neither fully immortal nor entirely mortal. Their fate was to live hard, die young, and be remembered forever. Perseus was among the first. Born of Dano, who had been locked in a bronze chamber by her father Acrisius, he was the child of Zeus's golden descent. From birth, he was marked by fate. Cast into the sea with his mother in a wooden chest, they washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where Perseus grew in obscurity, unaware of the destiny that awaited him. When King Polydex sought Danae's hand, Perseus rashly vowed to bring him the head of Medusa, the deadly Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone. Armed with Athena's mirrored shield, Hermes' winged sandals, and Hades' helm of invisibility, Perseus tracked the monster to her lair. With one swift stroke, he severed her head, birthing Pegasus from her blood. He returned triumphant, rescuing Andromeda from a sea serpent along the way, and forever sealing his place in the firmament of heroism. But Perseus was only the beginning. Across the land, other heroes were rising, each with their own trials. Heracles, the strongest of them all, was born from the union of Zeus and Alcmene. Hera, burning with jealousy, tormented the child from birth. Snakes were sent to his crib, but the infant crushed them with his bare hands. His life became a trial of suffering and redemption. Driven mad by Hera, Heracles killed his wife and children, and to atone, he submitted to King Eurystheus, who imposed 12 impossible labors upon him, slaying the Nemean lion, capturing the Erymanthian boar, cleaning the Augean stables in a single day, and descending into Hades itself to retrieve the three-headed Cerberus. Through each labor, Heracles endured with brute strength and unyielding resolve. Upon his death, burned upon a pyre by his own request, Zeus welcomed him to Olympus as a god, honoring his pain and valor. Elsewhere, the clever Odysseus ruled Ithaca. Though his tale would peak after the Trojan War, his legacy began during the rise of the Greek kingdoms. He was cunning, more so than any other man. When suitors plagued his home or monsters threatened his crew, it was not strength but intellect that saved him. Odysseus became the symbol of mortal wit, a counterbalance to divine power. Jason, another hero, sailed aboard the Argo with a crew of legends known as the Argonauts. He sought the Golden Fleece, a relic of divine power guarded by fire-breathing bulls, a sleepless dragon, and treacherous lands. Medea, a sorceress and the daughter of King Ates, fell in love with him and used her magic to aid his quest. Jason won the fleece, but at a cost. Medea's love turned into a curse. Her betrayal by Jason led to a vengeful wrath that echoed in tales of heartbreak and fury. Their tragic story revealed the fine line between divine gifts and mortal consequences. In another part of Greece, Theseus rose. The son of Aegisor, perhaps Poseidon, he grew into a brave youth who cleared the land of bandits and beasts. But it was in Crete, in the labyrinth of the Minotaur, that his name would be etched in legend. With a ball of thread from Ariadne, daughter of King Minos, Theseus navigated the maze, slew the beast, and ended the cruel tribute of Athenian youths. Yet, like many heroes, his success bore the seeds of sorrow. Forgetting to change his sails to white as he returned home, his father Aegeus, seeing black sails and assuming his son dead, leapt into the sea that now bears his name. Achilles, perhaps the most famous hero of all, was born to the sea-nymph Thetis and the mortal Peleus. In an attempt to make him immortal, Thetis dipped him into the river Styx, holding him by his heel. That spot remained his only vulnerability. Achilles grew swift, deadly, and proud. When the Trojan War began, foretold by prophecy and spurred by Helen's abduction, Achilles joined the Greeks. He was the mightiest warrior on the field, unstoppable in his wrath, godlike in his power. It was his pride that nearly doomed his allies. He refused to fight when insulted, and only returned after the death of his beloved Patroclus. Enraged, he slaughtered Hector and dragged his body in dishonor. But fate, ever cruel to heroes, claimed him with an arrow to the heel, guided by Apollo. And fired by Paris, his death marked the fading of the heroic age. The Trojan War was not just a clash of armies, but of gods. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, quarreling over a golden apple inscribed to the fairest, bribed Paris of Troy with gifts. Aphrodite offered Helen's love, leading to the war. The gods chose sides. Zeus watched with detachment, Hera burned with vengeance, and Poseidon shattered ships. The walls of Troy, built by Poseidon himself, finally fell to Odysseus's cunning, the wooden horse. Inside, Greek warriors waited, and when night fell they emerged, opening the gates and ending a decade-long siege. Troy burned, and the cost of divine pride was paid in mortal blood. As the ashes settled, the era of demigods began to fade. The gods grew more distant, their affairs turning inward as humanity took on a life of its own. Yet even as Olympus stood high above, the tales of these heroes lingered. Mortals built shrines to them, sang their deeds in epic poems, and named stars after their constellations. Though many of them met tragic ends, some betrayed, some struck down by fate, their lives shaped the values and dreams of the ancient Greeks. The age that followed was quieter. The blood of heroes diluted with time, and their feats became distant myths. But for a brief, shining era, the earth was populated by those who walked with gods, fought monsters, and sought eternal glory. They were not always just. They were not always kind. But they were brave, and their stories became the spine of Greek mythology. In their journeys, triumphs, and tragedies, mortals found reflections of their own struggles. The gods may have ruled from above, but it was the heroes flawed, daring, and doomed who truly defined what it meant to live. From the wind-swept peaks of Olympus to the shadowed depths of Hades, their footprints covered the world. Their swords carved destiny, their oaths bound kingdoms, and their names lingered in the prayers of warriors and kings. The age of heroes had passed, but their echo was immortal. The winds howled over the plains of Troy, carrying with them the cries of fate. Long before the first spear would pierce the earth outside its gates, the seeds of the war had been sown not in the hearts of men, but in the vanity of gods. It began at a wedding, the marriage of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis. Sea-nymph fated to bear a child greater than his father. All the gods and goddesses were invited save one, Eris, the goddess of strife. Enraged, she cast into the celebration, a golden apple inscribed with a single phrase, "To the fairest." What followed was not just a contest of beauty, but a contest of influence, pride, and manipulation. Hera, queen of the gods, offered power, Athena, wisdom, and victory. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, promised the heart of the most beautiful mortal, woman, Helen of Sparta. The judgment fell to Paris, a Trojan prince tending sheep on Mount Ida. He chose Aphrodite, and in doing so, sealed the doom of his city. Helen, already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, was spirited away by Paris. Whether by seduction or abduction, the Greeks called it theft. Honor demanded retribution, and so the call to arms rang out across Achaea. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, and brother to Menelaus, took command. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, cunning and reluctant, was compelled to join. Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, the greatest warrior of the age, was summoned from the Isle of Cyrus, where he had been hidden in disguise. From the hills of Arcadia to the shores of Crete, ships were built and men gathered. 1,000 ships set sail for Troy, and with them the fury of 100 wrongs. The siege of Troy would last 10 long years. During that time, the gods themselves chose sides. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon stood with the Greeks. Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and Artemis favored the Trojans. Zeus, ever the arbiter, remained aloof, attempting neutrality, though pulled by fate and emotion. What was to come would test even his resolve. In the first years, the war was marked by raids and duels, and by feasts and truces. Troy stood behind its mighty walls, guarded by Prince Hector, noble and just, the heart of the cities. Defense. Against him stood Achilles, near immortal, driven by pride and wrath. Yet for all his skill, Achilles quarreled with Agamemnon, who took from him his war prize, Briseis. In fury, Achilles withdrew from battle, and the Greeks suffered greatly. Without Achilles, the tide turned. Hector struck deep into Greek lines. Ships burned on the beaches. Morale faltered. It was then that Patroclus' dear friend to Achilles donned his armor and entered the fray. He fought valiantly, pushing the Trojans back, but he was no match for Hector. Slain upon the battlefield, Patroclus' death shattered Achilles' pride and ignited a terrible vengeance. Achilles returned to war, his wrath unrelenting. Armor forged anew by Hephaestus gleamed like fire. He cut through Trojan ranks like a storm and met Hector in single combat. The duel was fierce, watched by gods and men alike. But fate, already etched into the thread of destiny, favored Achilles. Hector fell, his body dragged by chariot before the walls of Troy. Priam, king of the city and father to Hector, humbled himself before Achilles, begging for the return of his son's body. In that quiet moment, warrior and king, enemy and father, shared in grief. Achilles relented, and for a time the war paused in mourning. Yet the end neared. The gods, weary of mortals and bloodshed, began to withdraw. Only a cunning mind could break the stalemate. Odysseus devised a trick-hand, enormous wooden horse presented as a gift. Left outside the gates as the Greek forces feigned retreat, the Trojans, exhausted and hopeful, brought the horse inside. That night, while the city slept, Greek warriors hidden within the hollow belly of the horse emerged. Gates were opened. The army returned. Troy burned. Paris struck one final blow. Guided by Apollo, with an arrow, he found Achilles' lone vulnerable spot, his heel. The hero fell, his death echoing the fall of heroes and the end of an era. Helen was returned to Sparta, though peace never truly settled. The Greek kings who survived faced their own Odysseys. Agamemnon returned to betrayal and death. Odysseus wandered for 10 years, lost across sea and myth. Aeneas, a Trojan prince, escaped with his father and son, guided by visions, destined to found a new people in Italy. From the ashes of Troy, new legends would rise. The Trojan War was not just a war of kings and empires. Of divine whim, mortal ambition, and the cruel beauty of fate, In its ashes, the gods began to drift farther from mankind. The time of myth was waning, and with it, the world edged closer to the age of men and memory. But the echoes of Troy would endure. In poems and songs, in oracles and omens, the story would be told and retold, of love and war, of pride and ruin, of a city lost and a legacy eternal. For the gods had their era, but it was in the war of mortals that immortality was truly earned. Smoke still clung to the shattered coasts of Troy as its once proud towers sank into ruin. The war had claimed kings, heroes, and legacies, but the gods, too, had not escaped unscathed. Their interventions, rivalries, and schemes had deepened. The chasm between Olympus and Earth, the world had changed. And as the fires cooled and the echo of war faded, a new tale began to stir. One of endurance, trickery, longing, and the slow dimming of divine brilliance. Among the victors of Troy stood Odysseus, king of Ithaca, renowned not for brute strength, but for a cunning mind unmatched among mortals. It was he who had conceived the wooden horse that spelled Troy's doom, and it was he who now sought the journey home across Poseidon's seas. But what should have been a swift voyage stretched into 10 harrowing years, during which the very will of the gods, the resilience of a man, and the fragility of fate would be tested to their limits. Odysseus left Troy with 12 ships and a heart burdened with both pride and longing. The gods, however, were divided in their sentiment toward him. Athena, goddess of wisdom, cherished his cleverness and wished him safe return. Poseidon, god of the sea, was enraged by Odysseus's blinding of his son, the Cyclops, Polyphemus. Thus, the sea itself became a battleground between divine justice and divine vengeance. The first trial came swiftly. Blown off course, Odysseus and his men arrived at the land of the lotus eaters, where the fruit of forgetfulness tempted his weary crew. Those who ate the lotus lost all desire to return home, preferring the eternal haze of contentment. But Odysseus, ever vigilant, dragged his men back to the ships, binding them, if necessary, determined to escape the languid paradise. Next came the Isle of the Cyclopes, where they stumbled into the cave of Polyphemus. Imprisoned and faced with certain death, Odysseus crafted a desperate plan. He offered the Cyclops wine, introduced himself as nobody, and plunged a sharpened stake into the monster's single eye as he slept. When Polyphemus howled in pain and his brethren asked who hurt him, he cried, "Nobody," and so was left unassisted. But in his escape, Odysseus made one fatal mistake. He revealed his true name, shouting it in pride across the waves. Polyphemus cursed him, and Poseidon heard. The curse followed them like a shadow. Storms drove them from island to island, from the land of Elus, keeper of the winds, who gifted them a bag of all the winds, save the west, to the cliffs of the Lastrygonians, cannibal giants who destroyed all but one of their ships. From there the survivors reached the island of Circe, the enchantress, where Odysseus's men were turned into swine. With Hermes' help, Odysseus resisted her spell, and after a year on her island, she released them, giving cryptic counsel. For the journey ahead to reach home, they would have to descend into the underworld. And so, in a shrouded land beyond the rivers of the world, Odysseus called upon the spirits of the dead. There he met the prophet Tiresias, who warned him not to harm the cattle of Helios and foretold of more suffering yet to come. He saw the ghost of his mother, his fallen comrades, and even Achilles, who, though a hero, confessed he would rather be a living slave than a dead legend. Returning from the land of shades, Odysseus braved the deadly song of the sirens, binding himself to the mast while his men plugged their ears with wax. Then came Scylla and Charybdis, the six-headed monster and the world-devouring whirlpool. Sacrificing 6 men to Scylla, Odysseus chose the lesser evil. Yet fate, ever unyielding, delivered him to tragedy nonetheless. On the island of Thrinacia, despite his warnings, his starving men slaughtered the sacred cattle of Helios. In divine fury, Zeus struck their ship with lightning. All were lost but Odysseus. Alone, he drifted to the island of Ogygia, where the nymph Calypso held him in immortal captivity for 7 years. She offered him eternal youth and love, but his heart yearned for Penelope, his queen, and Telemachus, his son, who grew up fatherless in Ithaca. The gods debated his fate, and at last Hermes was sent to command his release. Calypso, sorrowful, let him go. He reached the land of the Phaeacians, noble seafarers who welcomed him and listened with wonder to the tale of his wandering. Touched by his endurance, they returned him finally to Ithaca under cloak of night. But even home was not safe. In his absence, suitors had overrun his palace, seeking Penelope's hand and plundering his wealth. Disguised as a beggar, Odysseus plotted in silence, testing the loyalty of his household. Penelope, wise and grieving, had long resisted the suitors, weaving a shroud by day and unraveling it by night. At last, she promised to marry the one who could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. None succeeded, until Odysseus, shedding his disguise, took up the bow, bent it with ease, and loosed the arrow with divine precision. What followed was retribution. Alongside his son Telemachus and a few loyal servants, Odysseus slaughtered the suitors. Justice was brutal, but so was the offense. When all was done, Penelope tested him once more, asking about their bed, which only he could describe, carved from a living olive tree. His answer broke her final doubt. Husband and wife were reunited, but peace did not come easily. The suitors' families rose in vengeance, and Ithaca teetered on the edge of civil war. Only Athena's intervention restored harmony, bringing an end to the long suffering of a man who had dared defy the sea and the gods alike. Yet, as Odysseus reclaimed his throne, a larger truth unfolded across the Aegean. The age of myth was dimming. Heroes had walked the earth. Demigods had shaped history. But now, they faded, one by one, into memory. Achilles, Hector, Ajax, and Patroclus, all were dead. Heracles had ascended, but his labors were done. Perseus, Theseus, and Jason had lived their great deeds and passed into legend. Even Odysseus, the last of the old breed, was now a king in peacetime, a man among mortals, bound not to epic but to rule. And what of the gods? Though Olympus still loomed above the world, the gods no longer strode the earth as they once did. Their affairs had grown distant, their tempers quieter. Zeus brooded atop his throne, pondering fate. Hera withdrew, tired of jealousies. Poseidon roared less frequently, and Athena turned her gaze from battle to wisdom and arts. A subtle twilight had begun. The age of direct divine intervention was ending, not with a final war, but with the slow retreat of wonder. Mortal kingdoms grew, temples stood tall, but belief began to shift. The heroes had been buried beneath marble, and though songs were still sung, the bards now weaved them from the threads of fading memory. In Ithaca, Odysseus ruled wisely for many years. Some say he ventured once more restless, traveling west, beyond the known seas to meet his end in lands unnamed. Others say he died peacefully, an old man holding Penelope's hand as his last breath escaped under olive trees. Whichever tale is true, his name endured. The Odyssey had not just been a journey across oceans, it was the final great tale of the mythic world. It marked the divide between an age of heroes and the coming age of men. The twilight of the gods did not come in thunder or fire, but in silence, in the passing of time, in the turning of belief. The old stories would be remembered, told by poets like Homer and Hesiod, by priests and philosophers, by playwrights and kings. And though Olympus still watched from above, its gods had withdrawn from the mortal stage. Their time had come brilliant, turbulent, immortal, but even the gods must yield to time. For no realm, divine or human, escapes the tide of change. As stars wheeled overhead and seas grew calm, the last echoes of the Odyssey rippled across history. Not just a journey home, but a farewell to an era when gods and men had once walked the same road. Time passed, as it always must. The gods watched as the mortal world changed. Kingdoms rose and fell. Empires stretched their reach and crumbled into dust. Yet through it all, the whispers of Olympus remained. The temples still stood, proud and cold in the sun. Statues of marble faces wore their serene expressions, frozen in divine contemplation. The myths endured in stone, in song, in scrolls. But belief, that sacred bond that tethered the gods to man, began to falter. Zeus once ruled with unmatched power, but now even his thunder grew distant in the minds of men. The mortals had changed. No longer did they climb the mountain with offerings of honey and wine, nor whisper their prayers into the smoke of burnt offerings. They had grown proud, curious. They turned their eyes not to the sky for omens, but to the earth beneath their feet. They questioned. They studied. They began to think themselves masters of reason, of science, of order without Olympus. And yet, the myths refused to vanish. The stories endured on the lips of poets and philosophers. Homer's verses still sang of war and honor, of wanderings and wrath. Hesiod's voice echoed with warnings of the ages and the folly of man. Orators invoked Athena's wisdom in the courts, and generals still muttered Ares' name before the chaos of battle. In secret places, in quiet groves and hidden springs, there were still those who believed. A farmer who thanked Demeter for a good harvest. A sailor who poured a libation to Poseidon before venturing to sea. A mother who whispered a prayer to Artemis as her daughter labored in childbirth. But these were flickers, embers of a fire that once raged across all the lands. Gods themselves felt it. They no longer walked among men. Their forms grew indistinct, their powers bound by the waning of belief. Hermes wandered the world unnoticed, a traveler without destination. Apollo's temples were quiet. No lyres echoed in their chambers. Dionysus found his revels fading, his wine left unpowered. The gods became stories, and stories became legend, and legends became metaphor. Still, they watched. Olympus did not fall. It receded. Athena, once the embodiment of wisdom and strategy, sat high. In her temple, her eyes reflecting the stars. "They do not need us," she said one night, to no one in particular. "They have made themselves gods." Hephaestus, now more a ghost than a deity, watched blacksmiths forge iron with the fire he had once gifted them. Poseidon stared at vast ships crossing oceans he once ruled, their sails driven by engineering, not prayers. Even Hades found his realm altered. Death came not in sacred silence, but under the hand of medicine, war, and accident. The boundary between divine fate and human decision blurred. And yet it was not bitterness that took root in the gods. It was curiosity. They had shaped mankind, gifted them fire, law, art, and dreams. Now mankind forged ahead on its own. Perhaps this was destiny, to a story foretold in no prophecy, but hinted at in every tale. Man, the fragile, stubborn creature, rising from dust and guided by myth, would walk without the gods. But myths are not so easily forgotten in the academies. Of Athens, the stories were taught not as truth, but as treasures of culture. In Rome, the Olympians took on new names but survived, their essence adapted to suit a changing empire. Even as monotheistic faiths rose and took the world by storm, the old tales lingered hidden in art, in language, in the dreams of poets. Aphrodite's name lived on in love and beauty. Mars roared in the names of armies and war machines. Apollo flew again, not on golden chariots, but in the capsules of space-bound rockets. Mankind, in its hunger for the stars, named craters, planets, and moons after the ancient gods. Perhaps that was immortality, not eternal rule, but eternal memory. In distant times, the ruins of temples became monuments. Tourists walked where? Priests once chanted, scholars translated ancient verses. Children listened wide-eyed to the stories of a one-eyed giant, of a cunning Odysseus, of a tragic Oedipus, of gods who fell in love and waged war for pride and passion. And somewhere, beyond time, on the threshold of memory and myth, the gods watched, not as rulers, but as echoes. They whispered through leaves in sacred groves. They smiled through the brushstrokes of Renaissance paintings. They sang through symphonies and tragedies. They roared through literature and film. They endured in symbols. Carved in marble and stories passed from one generation to the next, Ares may no longer ride to battle, but the concept of war remains. Athena may no longer bless the just, but justice strives on. Hermes no longer brings messages from Olympus, but every act of swiftness, cleverness, and transition bears his mark. Artemis hides in the forests, in the untamed wild. Dionysus breathes. In festivals, in abandon, in the aching joy of dance, they are no longer gods. They are archetypes. They are the subconscious inheritance of humanity's soul. And what of Zeus? The king of gods no longer hurled thunderbolts, but his voice, once wrathful, became something subtler, a yearning, a memory, the presence one feels. In a storm, the fear and awe provoked by thunder. He remained not to command but to remind. Mankind, despite its inventions and revolutions, still needed meaning. In times of war and peace, love and death, they returned to the old stories. They reimagined them. They wrote new ones. They built modern epics, but always with a shadow of the ancient tales beneath. For every hero with a flaw, there was an echo of Achilles. For every tragic fall, a whisper of Icarus. For every journey, a trace of Odysseus' wandering heart. And so the legacy endured. The gods had been born from chaos, ruled in glory, clashed in fire, and faded into myth. But they had never truly died. They lived within mankind, within the art, the longing, the questions, in the eternal effort to explain the unexplainable. Perhaps the gods were never beings, but reflections of humanity's highest hopes and darkest fears, of love, vengeance, pride, and sacrifice. They were masks worn by the soul, immortal not by power, but by relevance. And perhaps one day, should the world quiet enough to listen, someone will still hear the faint sound of a lyre in the wind, see a glint of silver in the sea, or glimpse a lightning bolt in a storm not just as weather, but as memory, as myth, as a fragment of something eternal. As belief waned and myth became metaphor, the gods did not disappear. They simply changed. Because, in the end, it was never about whether the gods were real. It was about whether the stories were, and they are still. And so, the myths that once shaped gods and guided mortals now echo through time, whispering their truths to those still willing to listen. If you've enjoyed this journey through the heart of Greek mythology, from the birth of the cosmos to the twilight of the gods, don't let the story end here. Subscribe to the channel to keep uncovering the ancient worlds. Like this video if you were moved by the legends, and comment below with your favorite myth or hero. Your voice keeps these stories alive. Till next time, remember